Truth Unveiled here, and today I have some urgent information to share with you because if you think we're just at war with Russia and World War III, well, we're not, and you're going to see exactly what I'm talking about. Because there's war on domestic Americans, there's war on alternative media, and there's war on truth, and we're going to be talking more about that when we focus in on fake news later on in the report. That is, if Facebook and YouTube don't censor me like they have been doing the past month and a half. But let's keep going because the picture that you're currently looking at is actually a picture that was taken in eastern Cleveland as of Black Friday 2 days ago. And the reason I'm showing this to you is because this is not being reported by mainstream media whatsoever. Now, this is a screenshot from a video that was originally posted on Facebook, and this comes from Eastern Cleveland in Ohio that was taken 2 days ago. Now, I'm going to leave the video in the description box below so that you can watch it on your own time. But for copyright purposes, what I've done is I've taken screenshots of what was shown in the video, and as you see the military trucks coming in America. So while everybody's distracted with these holidays and getting ready for Christmas and everything, meanwhile your military and government are getting ready to declare war on you. Here are more screenshots that I'm showing you, and once again, this was in eastern Cleveland, and this was taken as of 2 days ago, just this past weekend alone. But we know that this isn't just a reality in Cleveland. These things in these military tanks and trucks have been spotted in places such as Chicago, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Texas, Los Angeles, and all over America. And many of them have been seen near abandoned warehouses, abandoned malls, abandoned railways, and I've talked more about this in many of my previous videos, once again reiterating who the war is really on. And just as I've talked about several times before, they're preparing to lock down the nation, declare martial law, and then declare war on Americans because that's the real war that they don't want you to know about and that they're trying to keep hush hush any single way they can. As you can see, it's only a matter of time, folks. But while the lying mainstream media continues to give us propaganda about what they consider fake news, and we'll talk more about that later on, here's the real war right here because I'm here at the Congressional Research Service that says the domestic terrorist threat, background and issues for Congress, and this was done and conducted as of January of 2013. Now this report is close to 70 pages long. I've gone over this in many of my other previous videos, but I'm going to reiterate it once again just so that you can see, according to your government and according to Congress, who they deem and classify as domestic terrorists and who they're going to war against. Now, I will also leave this link in the description box below so you can read it on your own time, but just looking up at the summary alone, you can see that this came after 9/11, even though we know the truth about that and how the DOJ and the FBI and all those other alphabet soups, how they're trying to classify terrorists according to them, even though we know who the real terrorists are. But I'm just going to keep going and show you the contents because this is what we're going to be looking at, what they deem is a domestic terrorist and why this is so important for each and every one of us. I've enlarged this so you can see it a little bit better, so you can see where the real war is and who they're really declaring war against. Because here we are on page 4 of this document, and it says, what is domestic terrorism? And we're going to go over it briefly because it says, in the most general statutory terms, a domestic terrorist engages in terrorist activity that occurs in the homeland. The FBI has led responsibility for terrorism investigations at the federal level. The FBI generally relies on two fundamental sources to define domestic terrorism. First, the Code of Federal Regulations characterizes terrorism as including, quote, the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Try telling that to your lovely military then. Try telling that to the police force because that's exactly the definition. But then it goes on to give more of a narrow definition of what they deem terrorism is, because it says 18 USC section 23315 more narrowly defines domestic terrorism and differentiates it from international terrorism and other criminal activity. And now this definition comes from section 802 of the lovely Patriot Act, or PL 107-52, the act that limits our rights and freedoms because of 9/11. And according to 18 USC section 23315, domestic terrorism occurs primarily within U.S. territorial jurisdiction, and domestic terrorism involves A. acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the U.S. or of any state, and B. appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, 2. to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or 3. to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. And while that doesn't sound too bad, if you keep going and just go another page forward, you actually see the FBI's definition. And according to the FBI, their definition of domestic terrorism is, quote, Americans attacking Americans based on U.S.-based extremist ideologies, and the DHS follows this construction of what they deem is domestic terrorism. So it's not being a murderer. It's not planting bombs in buildings, which is exactly what your government did on 9/11. Oh no, that's not terrorism. According to them, terrorism is US based extremist ideologies and Americans attacking Americans based on said ideologies. Oh my goodness. But it gets much worse than that, because here I am at an unclassified document from the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, or the DHS, which even talks more about domestic extremism, and they even give a lovely lexicon to even demonstrate what they think and deem is domestic extremism. Now this document right here is 12 pages long. I'm going to leave it in the description box below. It comes from about 2009, and we're going to look at a more updated version from 2011 in just a second to come. That's only 5 pages, but as you can see, here are some of the definitions that they give in alphabetical order. And as you can see right here, the definition they give for alternative media is a term used to describe various information sources that provide a forum for interpretations of events and issues that differ radically from those presented in mass media products and outlets, because your mass media loves to lie about things, and we're going to talk more about that, because now they've just generated a war on what they call and deem fake news. And then it gets even worse, because then they have definitions of anarchy and animal rights. So if you're defending animals and if you're defending things that are closest to you, you could be considered an extremist, you could be considered a terrorist. And if you're watching this video, you could be considered a terrorist, and you could be a national threat to national security, because that's the exact agenda that they're getting ready for. Because when a second 9/11 happens in this nation, who are they going after? They're going after so-called domestic terrorists, people like you and me. And it's time you see that with both your eyes open. Now, this document comes from the DHS once again, and this is the updated 2011 version, and it comes from November 10th, 2011, to be more specific. And as you can see, it says domestic terrorism and homegrown violent extremism lexicon, and it's only about 5 pages long, and you're going to see some of their definitions. And if you would like to read all of this on your own time, I will be sure to leave it in the description box below, because this page is actually only 5 pages long, and it gives a whole list of definitions of who they consider are extremists and who need to be taken out for the safety and security of America. Give me a break. But as you can see, some of these definitions actually repeat from the one that we saw back in 2009, such as animal rights extremists, or groups or individuals who facilitate or engage in acts of violence directed against people, businesses, or government entities perceived to be exploiting or abusing animals. And of course, you can read each definition separately on your own and come to your own conclusions. Like, for example, their definition of anarchist extremists are groups or individuals who facilitate or engage in acts of violence as a means of changing the government and society in support of the belief that all forms of capitalism and corporate globalization should be opposed and that governing institutions are unnecessary and harmful to society. But what you're going to see is that this goes much deeper than you think, because when you take a look at what they deem domestic terrorism, this is the definition you get: any act of violence that is dangerous to human life or potentially destructive of critical infrastructure or key resources committed by a group or individual based and operating entirely within the U.S. or its territories without direction or inspiration from a foreign terrorist group. Hello, that could mean anything from rioting and protesting. If you're rioting and protesting, you could be considered a domestic terrorism. What's going on with the North Dakota pipeline protest, you could be considered an extremist according to your government just because you don't want them poisoning your water anymore. Oh, but it gets much worse than that, because then it says the act is a violation of the criminal laws of the U.S. or of any state or other subdivision of the U.S. and appears to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping. A domestic terrorist differs from a homegrown violent extremist, and that the former is not inspired by and does not take direction from a foreign terrorist group or other foreign power. Did you hear that? Not only that, but the FBI even has documentation in their Project Megiddo documents that even classify what some of these homegrown violent extremists are. And as I've said earlier, it's not people who are murderers, or it has nothing to do with those who plant bombs or anything. Oh no, that's not who they consider extremists and terrorists. It's those who support the Constitution. It's those who support the Second Amendment and right to bear arms. It's those who are opposed to the New World Order. If you even know about the New World Order, you could be considered a domestic terrorism, even though George H.W. Bush talked about the New World Order on national television exactly 11 years before 9/11. So I don't know where they're getting that definition from. I'm telling you, this goes much deeper than you think. And if you're opposed to the government, and if you're opposed to the New World Order, if you're anti-gay, if you're anti-Muslim, if you're anti-abortion, you could be considered an extremist, you could be considered a terrorist, and you could have ties to ISIS, and that can give them the reason to declare war against you. I'm telling you, I'm not making any of this stuff up. I hope that you're seeing it. But it doesn't stop there, because the past 2 weeks, your government and your mainstream media have been pushing the war on truth, because they're considering everything of truth considered fake news. And this comes from activist post that says EU declares war on fake news, votes to counter propaganda critical of its policies. And what you're going to see is that Facebook, Google, and all of the mainstream moguls, what they're doing is they're trying to censor truth any single way they can, such as myself and all other alternative media outlets such as this one and many more. I'm telling you, it's only a matter of time until the whole shutdown begins, but this is just the beginning of it. Now, it's interesting because the fake news has been pushed due to fake reports that were pushed on Facebook that generated more shares than the lead stories, because there were reports of Donald Trump winning both the popular vote and the electoral vote, and that actually garnered more attention than mainstream posts, and that's why Facebook and Google are on these things, and that's why they're talking about fake news and trying to take action against fake news. But what the EU is doing is also just as bad, because now the EU has also effectively declared war on anti-establishment information as a wave of populism threatens the superstate survival. German Chancellor Angela Merkel has now joined Obama in speaking out against fake news, saying that such, quote, misinformation was manipulating public opinion on the internet. She also said that the growth of movements critical of her policies had been caused by these fake fake sites saying that, quote, we must confront this phenomenon and if necessary regulate it. Don't you see what they're trying to do? Don't you see how tyrannical this really is? Don't you see how this is limiting your freedoms once again? Because last I checked, we don't even have freedoms, the little to no freedoms that you already do not have. But now this is just pure Orwellian, pure 1984 all over again, because now they're trying to regulate what we can read, what information we can get and cannot get, just like they regulate what laws pass and don't pass behind our backs. This is just beyond ridiculous, and they're trying to tell us that the EU Parliament has passed a resolution that calls for the EU to respond to info warfare, particularly Russian propaganda from alternative news websites such as RT, which receive Russian government funding, as well as RT and Sputnik news agencies, which explains exactly why BBC and all these other mainstream sites are talking about this and have been talking about this for the past few weeks now, because this article comes from BBC and it says Facebook fake news and the meaning of truth. BBC would not know the truth if it bit them in the behind, and neither would any of these other mainstream media places, because what's really fake is 9/11 and the official government story that they give us. If you really believe what your government is telling you, it's time to think again. But not only that, mainstream media has been caught lying many times and multiple times in their stories, alphabet soup, such as NBC and ABC and CBS, and the list goes on, even when it comes to the Gulf of Tonkin as well, because we know darn well, and it's been proven by your government finally all these years later, that they lied and said that a Vietnamese ship attacked them just to go to war with Vietnam, even though no such attack actually happened. They were just pushing that propaganda so they could go to war, just like the 9/11 propaganda was pushed so that they can go to war with Iraq and Afghanistan and put a Rothschild bank in there, just like the plan of the Zionists, and just like they're going to do with Russia to put a Rothschild bank in Iran too, and even North Korea and Cuba. I'm telling you, it goes much deeper than you think. And then they give you the lie of climate change and, oh, we're fighting and combating climate change, when this is not the case either. More lies from the lying mainstream media, and of course the lies of NASA too. But don't worry, your government and your mainstream media, they have a plan to continue pushing their lies and their propaganda against the American people any single way they can, every which way they can, because this is from the Telegraph and it says, Facebook and Google promise to cut off fake news websites from advertising, and that includes media outlets such as myself, and that also includes many other truthers who are giving you real truth, real authentic truth from the heart, because they do not want you to know this, they do not want you to see this information whatsoever. And finally, we have our favorite that comes from the New York Times that says Google and Facebook take aim at fake news sites. Oh, but that doesn't include the New York Times or any of their lies whatsoever. But it's okay, let's keep going, because then the report says over the last week, two of the world's biggest internet companies have faced mounting criticism over how fake news on their sites may have influenced the presidential election's outcome. On Monday, those companies responded by making it clear that they would not tolerate such misinformation by taking pointed aim at fake news sites' revenue sources. Oh my goodness, the hypocrisy is real. What about their fake news that they generate to us each and every single day? I'm telling you, the war on truth has begun. Please seek Yahuwah and his true son Yahusha so you can see the bigger agenda ahead of time and where the real war really lies. But this is Truth Unveiled here, keeping you updated and saying as always, Shalom.